don't have a communication problem. You have a self-respect problem. Your endless explanations aren't evidence of your thoughtfulness. They're symptoms of your insecurity. Every time you feel compelled to justify a boundary you've set or a decision you've made, you're unconsciously announcing that you don't believe you have the inherent right to that boundary or decision without others' approval. I've seen this pattern destroy careers, marriages, and personal dignity across every culture and context imaginable. The most respected individuals in any room are never those who most eloquently explain their choices. They are those who make their choices with such clear conviction that explanation becomes unnecessary. Your power is not in your ability to justify yourself. It's in your willingness to stand unjustified. Your life changes the moment you make a new, congruent, and committed decision. Right now, in this very moment. Something powerful is happening. Some of you came here searching for answers. But what you really need is to stop searching for permission every day. I watch people of tremendous potential diminish their own power. They have the ability, they have the talent, they have the calling, but they lack the courage to stand firm in who they are without apology. When was the last time you made a decision and stuck with it without feeling the need to justify it to everyone around you? When was the last time you said, "This is what I'm doing," and left it at that? I remember a time in my early years when I was building my first organization. I had a vision that seemed impossible to others. People I respected told me it wouldn't work. Family members questioned my judgment. Colleagues suggested more practical alternatives. And what did I do? I explained, I justified, I gave lengthy reasons. I tried to convince everyone that my vision was valid. For months, I spent more energy defending my decisions than actually implementing them. Then one day, an elder mentor took me aside. He didn't say much, just looked at me with eyes that had seen many years and said, "Son, the more you explain yourself, the less authority you have. Great leaders state they don't explain." That statement hit me like lightning. I realized I was seeking approval instead of moving with conviction. I was undermining my own leadership by appearing uncertain about my own decisions. You see, every time you feel compelled to explain your decisions, you're unconsciously telling the world, "I'm not sure about this myself. Please validate me." You're placing your power in the hands of others, hoping they'll give it back to you with their approval. But respect doesn't work that way. Respect is not given to those who beg for understanding. Respect naturally flows toward those who know their worth and stand in their truth without wavering. Think about the people you respect most in your life. Do they spend their time explaining why they do what they do? Or do they simply move with purpose and allow their actions to speak for themselves? There's a fundamental law of human interaction. The more you try to convince others of your worth, the more they question it. The more you explain your decisions, the more others doubt them. Your need to be understood is natural. We all want to be seen for who we truly are. But there's a critical difference between being understood and needing approval. One comes from strength, the other from insecurity. When you stop explaining yourself, something remarkable happens. People begin to see you differently. They start to pay attention not to your words, but to your conviction. They respond not to your explanations, but to your certainty. I've counseled thousands of people who struggle with this very issue. Business owners who can't make decisions without calling a committee. Parents who negotiate with their children instead of guiding them. Individuals who water down their dreams because someone raised an eyebrow. Your life is too precious to be lived seeking the approval of others. Your purpose is too important to be diluted by the opinions of those who don't carry your vision. When you make a decision from your core, from that place of knowing that transcends logic, you don't need to explain it. The right people will understand without explanation. And the wrong people won't understand despite any explanation. Let me tell you something profound. Explanations are often just fear dressed up as communication. We explain because we fear rejection. We explain because we doubt ourselves. We explain because we've been conditioned to believe that we owe others justification for our choices. You don't. You don't owe anyone an explanation for the path you choose, the dreams you pursue, or the boundaries you set. The only explanation you owe is to yourself. And even then, your intuition often knows what your logic cannot yet articulate. I've seen transformation happen in an instant when someone finally grasps this truth. There was a woman in one of my seminars, a brilliant, accomplished professional who had started 5 successful businesses. Yet in her personal life, she constantly sought validation. She would make decisions and then call 10 friends to justify why she made them. One day, she made a major business decision without consulting anyone. When questioned, instead of launching into her usual detailed explanation, she simply said, "This is the direction I've chosen." Nothing more. She told me later that in that moment, she felt a power she had never experienced before. She saw respect in the eyes of her team that had previously been missing. By refusing to explain herself, she had claimed her authority in a way that all her previous successes had not. You see? Explanations often come from a place of seeking to be liked, but respect and admiration rarely stem from likability. They come from integrity, consistency, and the quiet confidence that doesn't need external validation. Stop diminishing your decisions with explanations. Stop watering down your convictions by seeking approval. Stop undermining your authority by appearing uncertain about your own choices. When you make a decision, make it with your full being. State it clearly. Implement it consistently. And then move forward without looking back. Without justifying. Without explaining. The world respects those who respect themselves enough to stand firmly in their truth. The world makes way for those who know where they're going and don't need consensus to get there. Your power increases the moment you stop explaining your power away. Your influence grows when you no longer seek permission to be influential. Your leadership becomes magnetic when you lead without apology. So I challenge you today. Make one decision, just one, and refuse to explain it to anyone. Feel the discomfort, notice the urge to justify, and then stand firm anyway. Watch what happens to how others perceive you. Watch what happens to how you perceive yourself. This is where transformation begins. This is where respect takes root. This is where you reclaim the authority that has always been yours, but you've given away. One explanation at a time. Here's the truth most people never grasp. Every time you offer an explanation for your decisions, you're paying a price you cannot afford. You're trading your power for approval. You're exchanging your authority for acceptance. And that's a transaction that will bankrupt your influence. Think about it. When someone demands an explanation from you, what's really happening? They're positioning themselves as the judge of your decisions. They're claiming the right to approve or disapprove of your choices. And every time you respond with justification, you're silently agreeing that they have this authority over your life. I want you to understand something profound about human nature. People don't follow those who are constantly defending themselves. They follow those who are so clear in their purpose that defense becomes unnecessary. Let me tell you about a man I mentored years ago. He was brilliant, educated at the finest schools, trained by the best minds in his industry. He built a company from nothing to a multi-million-dollar enterprise in just 5 years. But he had one fatal flaw. He couldn't make a decision without explaining it to everyone when he would direct his team. He would spend 20 minutes justifying why they should take a certain action. When he would implement a new policy, he would write 3-page memos explaining his reasoning. When clients questioned his approach, he would become defensive, offering elaborate explanations for his methodology. Do you know what happened? His team began to hesitate before implementing his directives. They started questioning his judgment behind closed doors. His clients began to take their business elsewhere. Why? Because his constant need to explain himself communicated one thing loud and clear. He didn't fully believe in his own decisions. The cost of constantly explaining yourself goes far beyond mere time wasted. It erodes your credibility. It dilutes your message. It transforms you from a leader into a petitioner, always seeking the approval of others. There's a psychological principle at work here. When you feel compelled to justify yourself, you're operating from a position of perceived inferiority. You're unconsciously telling yourself and others that your decisions don't stand on their own merit. They need supporting evidence to be valid. But true authority doesn't work that way. True authority is self-evident. It doesn't come with footnotes and appendices. It stands on its own because it emanates from a place of inner certainty. I've seen this playing out across cultures, across industries, across generations. The parent who explains every directive to their child raises a child who believes rules are negotiable. The boss who justifies every decision to employees creates a culture where authority is constantly questioned. The individual who explains every personal boundary teaches others that those boundaries are flexible. Let me be clear, I'm not talking about being dictatorial or dismissive. I'm talking about the quiet confidence that doesn't feel the need to convince others of its rightness. When you stop the habit of over-explaining, 3 things happen immediately. First, you reclaim the time and energy previously spent justifying yourself. Second, you begin to make clearer, more committed decisions because you know you won't have the crutch of explanation to fall back on. And third, perhaps most importantly, you change how others perceive you. I remember watching a transformation in a woman who attended one of my leadership seminars. She was a senior executive at a major corporation, but she confided that she felt her team didn't respect her leadership. As we worked together, I noticed that she would add because to almost every directive she gave. We need to focus on this project because. Always explaining, always justifying. I challenged her to go 1 full week without explaining any decision unless specifically asked for clarification. She looked at me like I had suggested she stop breathing, but she agreed to try. 1 week later, she called me, her voice filled with amazement. They're listening differently, she said. My team is responding to my directives with immediate action instead of questions. My superiors are treating my reports with greater weight. Even my husband is responding differently when I make decisions at home. What changed? She had. By removing the habit of explanation, she had stepped fully into her authority. She had communicated through her behavior that her decisions were not up for debate or approval. And paradoxically, this made others more likely to respect those decisions. You see, there's a fundamental misunderstanding that many people have. They believe that explaining themselves creates clarity and builds support. In reality, over-explanation creates doubt and invites argument. The most respected individuals in any field are not those who can most eloquently justify their actions. They are those who act with such clear purpose and conviction that justification becomes unnecessary when you constantly explain yourself. You're training others to expect explanations. You're teaching them that your decisions are open for discussion rather than implementation. You're establishing a dynamic where your authority is provisional, contingent upon the approval of others. The cost of this habit is too high. It costs you your power. It costs you your time. It costs you the very respect you're often seeking to gain through your explanations. So I challenge you. Become comfortable with the power of an unexplained no. Practice the authority of an undefended yes. Experience the freedom that comes when you no longer feel compelled to justify your existence or your choices to anyone but yourself. Ownership is the foundation of all authority. When you truly own your decisions, when you take full uncompromising responsibility for your choices without deflection or justification, you step into a power that cannot be given to you by others because it emanates from within. Most people don't understand this fundamental truth. You cannot simultaneously seek approval and experience freedom. These two states cannot coexist. Either you're living for the validation of others, or you're living from the certainty of your own convictions. I learned this lesson in a way I'll never forget. Years ago, I made a controversial decision in my organization. It went against conventional wisdom. It contradicted the advice of my advisors. It even seemed to contradict what had worked in the past. When I announced the decision, the questions came immediately. Why would you do this? Have you considered the consequences? Shouldn't we discuss this further? Every question was an invitation to explain myself, to justify my choice, to seek their approval after the fact. My old pattern would have been to launch into an elaborate explanation, to try to bring everyone on board through persuasion. But something had shifted in me. Instead, I simply said, "This is the direction we're going. I appreciate your commitment to making it successful." The room fell silent. Some people looked confused. Others looked concerned. But something remarkable happened in the following weeks. The very people who questioned my decision became its strongest advocates. Why? Because my certainty gave them certainty. My ownership created space for their ownership. When you fully own your decisions, without the crutch of explanation, you communicate something powerful. I am so convinced of this path that I don't need your agreement to validate it. This doesn't push people away. It draws them toward your conviction. Look at any person who commands genuine respect. They don't hedge their statements with qualifiers. They don't end their sentences with questions seeking approval. They speak with clarity and stand by their words without the need to defend them. This kind of ownership requires courage. It requires you to be willing to stand alone if necessary. It requires you to trust your own judgment, even when others question it. But this is the price of leadership. This is the cost of living authentically. Many of you are waiting for permission to fully own your lives. You're waiting for someone to tell you that your dreams are valid, that your boundaries are reasonable, that your needs matter. But that permission will never come from outside yourself. It can only come from within. When you make a decision, make it cleanly. Don't attach to it a paragraph of explanations. Don't water it down with "I think" or "I feel" or "maybe." State it plainly and let it stand on its own strength. I want you to try something that might feel uncomfortable at first. The next time someone questions your decision, resist the urge to explain. Instead, simply reaffirm your choice. That's what I've decided. Then stop talking. Embrace the silence that follows. In that silence, you'll feel the urge to fill the space with words, with justifications and explanations. Resist it. That silence is the sound of you reclaiming your power. That silence is the space in which your self-respect grows. True ownership means you don't pass responsibility for your choices to anyone else. You don't blame circumstances. You don't cite influences. You simply say, "This is my decision, and I stand by it." The world is full of people who make tentative choices and then look around nervously to see if others approve. These people will never experience the freedom that comes from true ownership. They will forever be prisoners of others' opinions. You were not created to live cautiously, seeking consensus for every move you make. You were created to live boldly, to make decisions with conviction, and to own those decisions without apology or explanation. When you stop explaining yourself, you start trusting yourself. When you stop seeking permission, you start granting it to yourself. When you stop justifying your existence, you start fully living it. Own your decisions, own your life, own your power, and watch how the world begins to respond with the respect you've been seeking all along. Boundaries are not walls that keep others out. They're the foundations upon which respect is built. When you establish clear boundaries and maintain them without explanation, you don't push people away. You actually create the conditions for more authentic connection. Most people have it backwards. They believe that constantly explaining their boundaries makes them more accommodating, more likable. But what actually happens is they train others to see boundaries as starting points for negotiation rather than lines of respect. Let me tell you about a young executive I mentored. When she first came to me, she was working 70 hours a week, always available on her phone, constantly responding to emergencies from her team. She was exhausted, frustrated, and felt undervalued despite her dedication. I asked her a simple question. When was the last time you said no without explaining why? She couldn't remember. Every no came with a lengthy justification. Every boundary she attempted to set was cushioned with explanations and apologies. I gave her an assignment. For 1 week, set boundaries plainly and without explanation. When leaving the office at a reasonable hour, don't explain why you need to leave. When declining a request that doesn't align with your priorities, don't justify the decline. Simply state your boundary and move on. She looked terrified. But won't people think I'm being rude? Won't they be upset if I don't explain? This is the fear that keeps so many people trapped in patterns of over-explaining. The fear that boundaries without justification seem harsh or uncaring. But here's what she discovered. When she stopped explaining her boundaries, people stopped challenging them. When she said, I'm not available after 6 p.m., without adding because I need to spend time with my family or because I'm taking a class, people simply accepted the boundary. Why? Because her tone conveyed that this wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't an invitation for others to decide if her reasons were good enough. This was simply the reality of her availability. Boundaries without explanation communicate strength. They say, this is not about my reasons, this is about my worth. They shift the dynamic from justifying your needs to simply honoring them. Many of you struggle with this. You've been conditioned to believe that you must have a good enough reason for every boundary you set. You've been taught that your needs alone are not sufficient justification for your limits. But what if you started from a different premise? What if your needs, simply because they are yours, are inherently valid and worthy of respect? What if you don't need to convince anyone else of their legitimacy? Try this exercise. Identify one boundary you've been over-explaining. Perhaps it's your need for quiet time, or your limit on work availability, or your preference in relationships. Now, practice stating this boundary clearly and concisely, without a single word of explanation attached. Feel the discomfort that arises. Notice the almost irresistible urge to add because at the end of your statement. That discomfort is the feeling of reclaiming your authority. That urge to explain is the old pattern fighting to maintain control. When you set a boundary without explanation, you communicate something powerful. My limits are not up for debate. My needs are not pending your approval. This isn't selfishness. It's self-respect. And self-respect is the soil in which others' respect for you grows. The strongest boundaries are often the quietest. They don't need to be defended. because they aren't presented as arguments to be countered. They are simply stated as facts to be acknowledged. Stop explaining your boundaries. Stop justifying your limits. Stop acting as if your needs require external validation to be legitimate. Start standing firmly in the authority of your own worth and watch how others rise to meet you there. Authority is not given, it is claimed. It's claimed in the moments when you choose self-respect over approval, conviction over consensus, and truth over comfort. True authority doesn't shout, it doesn't plead, it doesn't explain, it simply is. I want to share a story that changed my perspective forever on this matter. There was a woman I met during my travels in West Africa. She had no formal education, no inherited wealth, no powerful connections. Yet when she entered a room, people responded to her with unmistakable respect. I watched as government officials, educated professionals, and community leaders all deferred to her wisdom. I was fascinated by the source of her influence. What made this woman, with none of the traditional markers of status, command such respect for 3 days? I observed her interactions. I noticed something remarkable. She never explained herself. When she made statements, they were direct and unadorned. When she made decisions, they were presented as final, not as proposals for discussion. When others questioned her, she didn't defend or justify. She simply reaffirmed her position with calm certainty. On my final day, I asked her directly, "How did you develop such unquestionable authority in your community?" She looked at me with eyes that reflected decades of hard-earned wisdom and said something I'll never forget. "I speak only when my words improve upon silence. I decide only what I'm willing to stand behind. And I never, ever give my power away by trying to convince others that I deserve it." Her words struck me with the force of truth. Here was a woman who understood instinctively what many spend lifetimes never learning. Respect cannot be demanded, it can only be commanded. And it's commanded not through force or persuasion, but through the quiet power of unwavering self-respect. You see? She had mastered the art of self-authorization. She didn't wait for others to validate her worth or confirm her decisions. She moved through the world with the unshakable certainty that her existence needed no justification. Her decisions required no defense, and her boundaries warranted no explanation. This is the essence of becoming a person of authority. You stop seeking external validation and start operating from internal conviction. You stop explaining yourself to others and start trusting yourself more deeply. You stop diluting your power through justification and start concentrating it through decisive action. Many of you are waiting for someone to grant you the authority to live authentically. You're waiting for permission to speak with conviction, to act with certainty, to set boundaries without apology. But this authority will never be conferred upon you by others. It must be claimed by you. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself, you're claiming this authority. Every time you state a decision without justification, you're stepping into this power. Every time you honor your boundaries without defense, you're embodying this strength. The path to respect begins with self-respect. And self-respect begins when you no longer feel compelled to explain your worth, defend your decisions, or justify your boundaries to anyone, including yourself. So I challenge you now, claim the authority that has always been yours. Speak your truth without diluting it with explanations. Make your choices without weakening them with justifications. Set your boundaries without undermining them with apologies. Stand firmly in the knowing that you are worthy, not because others see it, but because you declare it. Live boldly from the conviction that your life needs no external validation to be valuable. Your choices need no outside approval to be valid. And your boundaries need no further justification to be respected. This is how you command respect without demanding it. This is how you lead without pushing. This is how you influence without manipulating. This is how you become a person of unquestionable authority in every area of your life. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you start living with authority. And when you live with authority, respect naturally follows.